Welcome to the Regroup Parenting Podcast, where we explore the amazing role God has entrusted to us in our marriages and as parents. Our desire through this podcast and as the Calvary Chat Family Ministry team is to share with you biblical insights, practical advice, and encouraging stories to support you on your parenting journey.
They don't know it yet, but they, you guys that are listening, this guy named Steve Bennett is just an absolute stalwart in the faith. He's one of our youth leaders. I think I told the guys, I think we already have a title for the episode. It's meet the oldest youth leader in the nation. And that's not a knock. That's every bit
Steve,
of a.
how old are you?
That's a compliment.
I'll be 74 next month.
Let's go.
So 74, and you not only serve in our high school ministry, but you also serve in our middle school ministry. What two grades are you representing in those two ministries?
5, 6, 7 as seventh graders is what we work with in middle school. Jesse and I, and DJ. Andrew
and Ashley.
And then one youth, high school, we work with the ninth graders.
That's awesome.
I've got a question.
Yes.
So, Steve, you said something to me and Pastor Kenny when you decided you wanted to serve. There was a reason for it. What was that reason?
What I recall saying this, that because of the situation of our world's going, I teach middle school. I'm in my 47th year of teaching.
He's got a third ministry, right?
And for a long time, I'd been praying. I've been coming here for about 14 or 15 years at Calvary. And so the Lord said, just hold back. And because I was so involved and still am at school. But I think over COVID and seeing all the lies that we're hearing and seeing the way the nation was going with all this confusion about gender and all these things, the Lord said it's time to reach out to even more youth.
It's so awesome. So here's what I want to do. I want to hear your story. So I want to start with, because I think that you have a ton to offer. My grandmother taught school for 43 years, and the larger portion of that was in special needs. She was incredibly gifted. She's in her mid 80s now, and still just a prayer warrior. And it's one of the things that's interesting that I've seen is culturally, especially over the last decade or so, there's been a real departure, well, probably over the last 20 years, but there's been a real departure from the value that is brought from the older generation. And the younger generation has kind of divorced themselves from any form of need from the older generation, and they've really kind of, in many ways, have cut themselves off, which has always been odd to me, because even growing up as a young kid, I preferred to be 7, 8 years old. My preference was to be at the dining table after Thanksgiving dinner with all of my great uncles and grandparents and listening to the conversations about politics and how it used to be and all of those things. And so I think there's just, even biblically, there's a passage of scripture that says the glory of a young man is his strength, and the glory of an old man is his white hair, because it's reflective of wisdom. And you don't even have white hair. Do you dye your hair?
No.
That's a very personal question. I didn't think you did. No. That's wild. God's just continued to pour the fountain of youth out on you. I'm starting to get some grays that show up right here. I'll be white soon. I don't know that means I'll have any wisdom at that point.
I think you do.
But so I think there's value in, considering the life experience of someone who is, over 4 decades of life past where I am, and seeing an expression of life even through your childhood and through the Lord calling you to be a school teacher and whatnot. So tell us when you were born, what year you were born, what was happening, how you grew up, what are some of the core memories, and then kind of lead us towards when the Lord saved you, how that took place.
Okay. I was born May 13th, 1951, Mother's Day. Best
Wow.
present she ever got for Mother's Day.
You tell all your siblings that too, right?
And I don't tell them, but no, I'm the second oldest of six.
Wow.
My older brother's my half brother. My dad was married before he married my mother, and but we're all close. There's 2 girls and 4 boys, and growing up, I've always lived in Chattanooga. Grew up in East Lake. Still live in East Lake. When my grandmother died in '86, I bought the house from the family.
Wow.
And they gave me a really good deal. And but my grandfather, my mother's dad, he was the oldest of 12, and all his siblings lived in East Lake. For maybe one lived outside of East Lake, but they were all like they great aunts and great uncles. But and they would play with us and do things with us, and we could never go too far away because someone knew us and would see us, so we couldn't get in too much trouble. And so I always grew up kind of what you were saying, Tyler, that with older people, I never thought of people being old because they would get down and play with us, and my one uncle would take me fishing and different things. But my parents, they never had a good relationship. And in fact, it was just maybe 30 years ago that I found out that the reason they got married was because my mother was pregnant with me. And I had no idea. I was at their house one day. I'd stopped by there after school, and I was just looking. Nobody was there. I was just looking through old pictures, and I saw the marriage certificate. And for the first time, I looked at the date, and I thought, wait a minute. There's when they got married, and this is when I was born. And it flashed. And I realized that now I started understanding a few things a little bit better. So immediately I called one of my brothers, who I'm not even a year older than him. I like 3 days being a year older than him. But his wife answered the phone, and I said, I'm Mom and Dad's, and I just saw that on the birth certificate, and they had to get married because of me. And she said, you didn't know? I said, no, I didn't know. No one ever told me. And she said, well, you better speak to your brother. I said, no, I'm okay. God got me here. And it may not have been the ideal situation, but he got me here. I was born with a birth defect, cleft lip and cleft palate. I've had 5 surgeries on my face, and they wanted to do another one when I got older. And I said, if we don't have to, I don't want to do any more.
Yeah.
And so anyway, as I grew up, it was a lot of turmoil in the family because of my parents. My dad had a good job with the government, but he was a big-time gambler. And he was a good-looking man, and he ran around on my mother. And when we were in elementary school particularly. But there was one time I can remember in the kitchen, they had gotten into an argument, and my dad hit her, and she was lying on the floor bleeding. And still gets emotional sometimes, but and I don't know what I said. As a little boy, I ran up to him, grabbed his legs, and I probably said, "No, don't do that," or whatever. I don't know. And he just turned and walked away. But that's the kind of situation we grew up in. And sometimes when he would be off on his gambling sprees and be gone for days, and I would ask Mother, please don't say anything to him when he comes home, because they all get into it. And I can't remember. I can't tell you how many times I went to sleep with a pillow over my head with them screaming and hollering at each other. And so what I learned through all that, and later on, and I'm jumping ahead now, but that there was so much always conflict. I was the peacemaker and hated conflict and would just do things to keep peace. But anyway, when there was one time that he went off with another woman for 6 months, bought her a new car. We had nothing. Mother didn't drive. She drove, but we didn't have a car. And so put food on the table, she started washing and ironing people's clothes for them instead of them taking to a dry cleaner. And she'd stay up sometimes till 4 o'clock in the morning to get them ready, and they'd stop by on their way to work. And I'd try to sometimes sit up with her, but I'd always fall asleep on the sofa. But my mother would have these terrible migraine headaches that would knock her out almost for a couple of days. And even though I was young and oldest, she would use me to try to take care of them while she couldn't do anything. And later, as I grew up, she would say, I felt I put too much on you then. I said, it's okay, it worked out. But, and I had migraines, but mine was, you wouldn't know it now, but I used to be a worrier. I thought one time when I was in Sunday school, they took us as kids to visit an orphanage. And how it impacted me, I thought, what if something happens to Mother? What will happen to all of us? And I thought, I don't want to be separated from my brothers and sisters. And but when how I got saved was around that time, around, I don't know, 8, 9, something like that. A child evangelist was at a neighbor's house and had invited the kids in the neighborhood, and I went. And that was the night that the Lord showed me that I needed Jesus.
Wow.
And the only thing I can really remember, I come home and I tell my mother, I've become a Christian, I've been saved. Didn't understand it all really at that time, but I did. And the church we went to, East Lake Baptist, it's no longer there, it's another church now. But that's where I was baptized. And my mother would take us while we were little to church, but then as we grew older, she didn't go, and we would go. We were old enough to go ourselves. And my dad never went. He had heard truth. He had an uncle that was a pastor, but it never. He had grown up without a dad. His dad died when he was 9. And my grandmother never remarried. The grandmother on his side, and so he didn't have that guidance there, I don't think. But anyway, the Lord just started working in my life. And I can remember my brother Ted and I would, as kids, how brothers and sisters will fight. I never would hit my sisters. I would aggravate them and then run and lock the bedroom door, and they're bounce on, let us in or we're going to kill you. That's why I'm not going to let you in. I would never hit them. And but my brother and I would get into it some, and my parents had said, don't ever hit Steve in the face if you're fighting because of the birth defect. And but after I became a Christian, every time we would fight, I started feeling bad. And I'd say, Ted, I'm sorry, and then he would say something cute, and then we get back into it. So it was a gradual breaking me away from it. And I think the last time we ever really even had an argument, we had gotten into it, and we were in the kitchen, and I still remember this pretty vividly. I don't know, 14 or 15 maybe, and he was hitting me, and I didn't hit back. I just said, you just think you're so tough. You're just just saying names to him, nothing vulgar, but just putting him down. And all of a sudden, he started crying, and he got a knife out of the cabinet, out of the drawer, and he said, I'm going to kill myself. And he took off running across the street to the park, and I thought, oh no, what have I done? And I went and called, Mother, Ted's going to kill himself. And of course, being a good mother, she went after him and all. But that's the last time I ever remember us really getting into it. And it also shows what the Scripture says about our words have the power of life and death in them. And so anyway, as God just kept growing me and gradually, and at times putting people in my life, not what I see here at Calvary. That's one of the best things I think, and I tell people this. I have never seen kids taught, and I've been in youth groups and helped in youth groups, like they are taught here. And where it's not just, you come and give a 5-minute devotion and then play. The Word is the emphasis.
Yeah.
And walking with the Lord. And then the times are there for the other opportunities. But the Word is the issue, pointing people to Jesus. And I'm really spoiled because I get to hear it Saturday and then Wednesday, and of course on Sunday. So I have no excuses. And what's so neat, is how y'all on Saturday with the 5, 6, 7. We're going through Revelations now. Of course, we're in Genesis when I started, but how y'all do it age appropriate for the 5, 6, 7, and you get really more serious with the older ones on Wednesdays, and it's just been so good. And what I've done, I've showed some of you. I get the notes that's on the sheets y'all hand out. Then I go home and I rewrite them in my notebook and tape the one that I wrote down. But I rewrite each word and add the scriptures that y'all give extra that aren't on the list, and which reinforces it in my own life. But as I grown up, and the one incident that I had no idea I was ever going to be a teacher. That was never on my radar at all. Being a kid, you think of everything. I thought, well, I've had all these surgeries. I could be a plastic surgeon. And I thought about that, and just different things. But the one incident that I think, as I look back now, that probably impacted me more than anything as far as my teaching goes, besides, of course, the Lord. But the Lord Jesus, I was in the first grade, 6 years old, and it was towards the end of the day before we got out, and there was the teacher I had was an older lady. A boy sitting by me did something, I don't know what, but she got so mad, she came back there, and she was so angry, she grabbed me up instead of him. And in those days, they could spank you. She was and was spanking me with her hand. And then when she stopped, she saw she had the wrong boy. And I didn't cry then. I was only 6. I wanted to, but I didn't. And the bell rang, and that's when when I went out in the hall, and I just lost it. And I was just boo-hooing. And not because it hurt, but because it hurt my feeling that she thought I did something wrong. And my older cousin, who was like in the 4th or 5th grade, I don't remember which, was coming down the hall, and he saw me. He said, "What's wrong?" And I couldn't get it out. But the teacher did call my mother and apologize for what she did. But from that point on, till I was a junior in college, at Covenant College, you would have not known I was in the classroom hardly. I was just real quiet, never got in an argument with anyone at school, never got in a fight with anyone at school. Only one time in high school I got a detention for talking, I know, which was rare. But I always, did what I was supposed to do. I wasn't the greatest student. It was always easier, I found out, to be playing when I was growing up than sitting in the house trying to study, because that's when everything you're thinking about it. And we would play we had some older friends, men that were like 10 and 12 years older than us, that would let us play ball with them over in the park and stuff. Every Saturday we'd play football for 3 or 4 hours, and softball in the summer, and just all the time. And they just not all of them were Christians, but they were not bad guys, and some of them were, but Christians. But they would play with us and just took us under, and so
those were good days.
Those were good days.
Those are simple days right there.
They were simple days, and as I went on to college, graduate from high school. I was praying, okay, what do I do? And so I've been saving. I've been working since I was 13. Started out with the paper route. And my brother and I made the basketball team at the junior high school. And but at that time, the Free Press was in the afternoon in Chattanooga, and the Times was the morning paper. They were separate. And they're together now, and it's just a morning paper. But since we had that Free Press, people wanted their paper on time. And so my brother and I told Ted, I said, well, I'm going to have to, one of us got to quit playing basketball so we can deliver the papers. And he wouldn't quit, so we need the money, so I quit. And I said, okay, I'll play next year, and you'll carry the paper, and I'll play on the church team. And so the next year came, and he wouldn't quit, so I kept playing on the church team. But as we went on, I graduated from high school. And I started out at UTC, and I just turned 18 when I was graduating. And I don't think I was mature enough to handle all the stuff that they were, you were going to classes then in 1969. And, of course, the Vietnam War was going on, all these things that, I had a couple of professors that smoked in class. They used all kinds of language, and I thought, I'd never heard of this before like this. And I just didn't care for it. And so anyway, a lot of incidents, and I'll skip over some of those things. But eventually I left UTC and ended up at Covenant eventually after going through to a couple of other colleges to see. I went to Cleveland State Junior College. Loved it there. It was so different. And but you can only stay so long in a junior college. And then I went to Belmont for a semester in Nashville, but felt I wanted to come back here and didn't want to go into debt. And I went to Covenant. It was cheaper then. I couldn't afford to go there now. It's like $50,000 a year. But it took me 9 years to get my 4-year degree. Wow. Because I had to work and go to school, and sometimes take off some time and all. But anyway, what helped me get over what happened in the first grade, my favorite professor at Covenant, Dr. Muller, at sociology, it was a small class. One day he asked me to stay behind after dismissal. And, you always think, okay, what have I done? Something like that. And he said, Steve, why are you always so quiet? You don't say too much. You're doing fine, but you don't say much. One way, somehow God used him, and it took me all the way back to that first grade.
Wow.
And I was set free. And so anyway, when I graduated, I had 20-something family and friends come to watch the graduation, and they could to make sure this was really happening. And I do remember I did have a nightmare the night before the graduation. I dreamed that I got up there and I was a half credit short, they found. And but fortunately, it was just a nightmare. But anyway, I graduated, not the top of the class, I just got through. And I'd been praying, what do you want me to do, Lord? And I'd thought about law school, and I thought, well, that'd be interesting. How could I get law school with my grades? But if that's what the Lord wanted, he could. But my family kept saying, Steve, we don't think you're the lawyer type. But anyway, someone that I knew that was a professor at UTC, he was a friend of a friend that we had been playing tennis with for some time. And he was a school board chairman of a Catholic school, All Saints Academy, that's no longer there, but it was a feeder school downtown to Notre Dame. And he said, there's a job opening. Somebody could come. Would you like to try it? And I thought, well, I don't have anything to do right now. And so there you just needed a degree. And so I signed it. And for 2 years I taught math. I was the only Protestant teacher there. And anytime the headmaster, she was a former nun. And, you hear all these stories about nuns being tough and stuff. And but God gave me an opening with her. But any time the teachers wanted something, they would come to me and say, you go ask her. And I said, why me? And you put the fear of God in her. And I thought, what? And it's just because I didn't go along. When they had their fundraisers, it was different than what the fundraisers we have here. And, like casino night and all the stuff that goes along with that. But I would go to Mass with them when the St. Peter and Paul was just down the street from us. I didn't participate with our classes. We'd had to go with them. I would sing, but, I never did the sacraments and stuff. But a lot of times I would just pray while I was sitting there. I'd just pray for the people, if they're not Christians, those that are here, whether Catholic or not, to come to know the Lord. But anyway, I taught there for 2 years and then felt the Lord was calling me to seminary. And so I told them, and I said, this will be my last year. And I went to New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. And it's like, I guess I'm hard-headed. It's like the Lord took me there. I was there a quarter, and I thought, I hate this. This is just not, it is, I'm not sure everything I'm hearing's right. I just don't feel comfortable here. And I really miss teaching. And go back just before that, I was kind of brought up on Precept Ministries. When it was just a barn, and just kind of was there for Bible study and stuff, and getting the Word. And then, of course, as I got older and grown man, I was a counselor there during the summer, a co-director with a female counselor. But anyway, I left after the first quarter. I did okay, but I came back on the way in Gulfport, Mississippi. My car motor blew up, and had to spend my last dime, spend a couple of nights there until they rebuilt it, and got home. Had no job. I moved in with my grandmother. I'd been staying with her and helping her, and doing odd jobs. And then the principal from the Catholic school heard I was back in town, and she said, "There's a teacher who's going to have a baby and not going to come back after Christmas, and we'll give you your old job and pay you your old salary, and if you can do it." And I said yes, and I thought, okay. I knew then I needed to get my certification if I was going to teach in a public school or somewhere else. So I applied at UTC. They accepted me. And the neat thing about it is the professor that I had was my advisor, taught in education, was the professor that was the school board chairman at the school. And I had taught his two sons, and I even house sat at their house when they would go out of town. And so the Lord worked it out where I got every class I needed in that one semester. So after school, I would go over there and do my class and come back. But here's the neat thing, though. While I'm taking these classes after teaching 2 years, and they're telling us that, they're thinking, none of this stuff works that you're telling us, but I kept that to myself. But anyway, got that. And that summer, I thought, okay, it was 1980. And they were laying off. The economy was bad, Carter, Reagan, switching over to Reagan, and 81. But a teacher in Walker County, who I grew up with, and her husband called me. And he was one of the men that would let us play ball with him and everything. And just a godly man. He is a godly man. He's 85, much older than me, but not that much older, but older. And he said, "Steve, there's a job opening. A teacher got married and moved back to where they're going, where they're from. And if you're interested, you need to call and make an appointment." So I called with the principal, and I went down there. Their school had already been going 4 days. And
the school itself.
The school itself, the classes had already begun.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And so we talked, and he said, "Well, we can't sign a contract to see if our numbers are up, but yes, you can. Yeah, we'll hire you." So he took me into the class, introduced me, and it was a self-contained seventh grade. They hadn't individualized yet, and he left, and I fell in love with those kids. I found out later that the other seventh grade teachers had put everybody in that classroom they did not want in that classroom.
Wow.
And here I am now, it's self-contained. I had to teach everything, so I was studying more than they were. And except for PE, they'd go to PE. And lots of times I went to PE just to play with them, to get it, be out there with them. But I fell in love with those kids. And they came from all kinds of different situations. And some of them I'm still in touch with today. But that next year, the 8th grade teacher left, and I asked, could I move up to 8th grade? And so I
stayed with them.
For most of them. Some went to another class. They divided them up. But I had most of them. And it was a neat experience. I was at that school 6 years before the Lord moved me to where I'm at now.
And how long have you been at Gordon Lee?
This is my 37 years.
37 years.
Yeah.
Man, so there's
put a mic in front of him and
just let him go.
Let it go.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No, not at all. There's a lot there's a lot that goes through my mind just listening to your story. The first thing that I would love for you to lean into is culturally, one of the things that we find is we've really fallen into a victimhood mentality of believing that you're a product of your experience. Mm-hmm. And as believers, we know that isn't true, mm-hmm. right? In that the scripture says that he will take what the enemy intended for evil and he will use it for good. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, I think we've in many cases, I'm broad brushing, but we departed from that truth, and we kind of allow, especially young kids that have a poor family experience or home life at a young age. Not that there's not going to be impacts to that. I totally, we recognize that, we understand that, and we sympathize with that. However, there does reach a point at which, your experience becomes the defining factor and the dictator of the outcome of your life. And we've seemed to allow that to become a little bit of a normality in our culture. And so listening to, especially some of the tender parts of your story, and your memories are very vivid of just being as young as 6 years old and seeing your mom abused, your dad run around on your mom, or your dad. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if you might lean into, obviously we know that it was just in part the faithfulness of the Lord. But you're probably one of the single most joyful people and most consistent people that I've ever met in my life. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting because you came from a joyless and to some degree, and unstable expression of life. And so do you have any thoughts on, or even encouragements? I think about even parents, like your dad, his story, his dad died at 9 years old. He had no male figure. What are your thoughts on that concept of not letting the experience define the future? And then, lean into that. I mean, you're anyone that, I guess my point is, anybody that would meet you probably would not guess that was your upbringing.
Oh, God's grace is awesome. I look back, I even with my dad, I don't think there was ever any anger there. He physically, he never abused us. Verbally, he never abused us. I guess the abuse would be he kind of ignored us. And but he did get better with the younger ones came along, and especially with the grandkids, he was better. And but in 1978, I'd been in the Word that summer. My first year teaching, during my planning period at All Saints Academy, I went down in the payphone. We didn't have cell phones then. Put my dime in, and called my dad at home, and he answered the phone. But the Lord had shown me I did have bitterness that I didn't know about. It would only come up at certain times, like when I paid my tuition and had a dime left till I got paid again. I think my dad could never help me. But I repented of it, and I called him and I said, Dad, I just want you to know I love you. We're not close, but I'd like that, but I forgive you for everything. He didn't say a word, he just listened. And when I hung up, it was like 1,000,000 pounds was lifted off of me.
Wow.
And there was no more, ever, any more bitterness. And as I said, with the going back to that time, how the Lord, 30 years ago or so, when I found out how I got here, and I stopped by my mother's house. This was about a month or two later after I had found out how I was born, how it came about. The Lord said, you need to tell your mother you know. And one day I just stopped by there, and she was there by herself. But when I walked in, she was crying, weeping. And I said, Mother, what's wrong? And something in the family had happened. And I said, Mother, that's not your fault. And it was just like, in my mind, it's just like the Lord said, tell her now. And I'm thinking, Lord, she's upset. And he said, tell her. And I looked at her, I said, Mother, I know how I got here. And she looked at me and she said, how did you find out? I said, Mother, it doesn't matter how I found out. God forgave you about that for a long time ago. And she fell over on my shoulder and she just wept. Her tear at my shirt was wet.
Wow.
And wept. And I just held her and she said, I've never been with anybody before. It only happened once. And I thought, well, it only takes once. But she was 24 when I was born. My dad was 24 too, but he would turn 25 soon. But we just held, and then when she quit crying, and I told her how much I loved her, and it was never mentioned again. Never mentioned again. And I have wondered, and I've tried one time to ask my sister that's 2 years younger than me, I said, what do you know about? I don't want to talk about it. But I mean,
part of it's the time period, right? I mean, that's
yes.
extremely taboo conversation.
It was, because I wonder, my mother would say some things sometimes that, and I never understood what she'd say, that I think her family gave her some hard times about it. Because I know, but I never could figure out what do you mean. And my dad could never use this against her again, because sometimes when he'd be upset with her, he'd say, well, you don't know your mother like I know her. And I'm thinking, I know her pretty good. She was with us and stayed with us when you were gone. I didn't say that, but I'm thinking that. Yep. And because one of the things that she did real quickly, when he was gone that period of months, every Saturday she would get my brother and my sister and I, there were three of us there then. Two more would come along later. And we would walk to the little grocery store 4 blocks from our house. I would hold their hands. And she would go in with the money she'd made extra from the washing and ironing people's clothes. She would buy bologna, bread, some potato chips, vanilla ice cream, and grape soda. And when we would get home, she would fry bologna, and we'd have fried bologna sandwiches and make a grape soda. And that was a real treat for us. And so, these are just the things that she did and for us. And one other time, a vivid memory, I can remember one time my mother got so mad at my dad. He had on boxer shorts, and that's all he had on. And they must have got into an argument. She chased him out of the house. I can still see him running out the front door and running around the house. And she's chasing him with a butcher knife. And he's running, which I would run too. But of course...
Bennett did that to Tyler last week.
But nothing happened, fortunately. And there's just things. But the forgiving him was a freeing part.
Yeah, that's exactly what was going through my mind. You have lived, a lot of times we think of, I think about you, as parents, you take a lot of the things that you experience, good and bad, you take those into your parenting, right, to some degree, if they're not dealt with appropriately. And obviously the exhortation is the Lord's got to sanctify us. And we've got a parent not from what was modeled for us, but what he has modeled for us, right? The father that he's been to us, the savior that he's been to us, the advocate that he's been to us, and his way is better. But you mentioned that forgiveness piece, and I'm thinking about some of our parents that are listening, and whether there's a good experience in childhood, a bad experience, there's no perfect experience.
Right.
And so somewhere along the way, it's just the reality. Every single mom and every single dad is going to fail their kids at some point. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of the process of healing and part of the process of sanctification is that forgiveness piece, where we think that forgiveness gets to get extended when a certain response from the person that hurt us is produced, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I'll forgive them when. I'll forgive them if. And none of that happened for you. There was no, which in those days, the idea of a parent apologizing, that was a foreign concept. I mean, that just did not happen, right? And so I just want to highlight that, like, for the parent that's listening to your story, there's some gnarly aspects to what you experienced. And the Lord led you to a position of forgiveness, not just in concept, but for you as the believer to actually take the step of calling your dad and going, hey, I forgive you, and you just need to know for all of it. I forgive you for all of it. And it's as opposed to thinking that forgiveness exists for the individual that committed the wrongdoing. What we find in the scripture is that forgiveness, and through personal experience, is that forgiveness is really intended for the heart of the individual to be free from the infraction that was committed against them. And you're a walking testimony of that. There was no step on his behalf of repentance or even confession, but it was the extension of forgiveness from the person that was done wrong that actually produced the freedom from the burden of the bitterness that existed in you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Regroup Podcast. If you have any questions, prayer requests, or topics you'd like to hear us cover, please email us at regroup@calvarychat.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook to stay updated on our latest episodes. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. And until then, blessings to you and your family.